Welcome back to PLS 510. Today we want to take up the topic of specialty forages. And I'm using that catch-all term to describe those forages that have what I call superpowers. They come into the discussion when you have a certain need to be filled. And they don't probably have all the characteristics that it would take to get into our top 5 or 10 forages in Kentucky, like tall fescue, orchard grass, bluegrass, timothy, alfalfa, red clover, white clover. So let's get started. The first one I'd like to take up is sweet clover. And this is a photograph of sweet clover. It is a very erect growing legume with some pretty characteristic looking flowers. They may be white or they may be yellow. And also a leaf that does resemble alfalfa somewhat, but is different, and we'll see exactly how different in just a moment. To check, and alfalfa and sweet clover are oftentimes confused, and to check these or to compare these or to know which one you're looking at, the alfalfa is going to have serrations around the outer third of the leaf, but sweet clover will have serrations around the whole leaf edge. There's a better picture of the sweet clover, which shows somewhat better that the serrations go around the whole leaf edge. Sweet clover is going to belong to the genus Mellilotus. One of those species is officinalis, and that's the yellow-flowered one shown in this picture. But as you can see, you will see on the next slide, there are at least a couple of other species that are called sweet clover that actually come into play. Sweet clover superpower, it is a soil building legume. It adds nitrogen, and its taproot improves soil tilth or the structure of the soil, and that's its superpower. That's where it comes into the discussion, at least on the positive side of the forage characteristics. A couple of other things about it. It prefers pHs that are high, above 6.5, but tolerates low P and low K, and you could say that might be a superpower. It has both, there are both annual and biennial types, and it's considered unpalatable because of coumarin, which is a compound in the sweet clover that leads to one of the negative superpowers of sweet clover, and that's sweet clover poisoning, which is hemorrhaging due to moldy sweet clover hay. In moldy sweet clover hay, coumarin is converted to dicoumarin or dicoumarol, which is a very powerful anticoagulant, leads to hemorrhaging and death, and it is the ingredient that is in the rat killer warfarin. As I said, there are more than one species that are considered to be sweet clover, and the toxicity or the coumarin content varies among the sweet clover type. Mellilotus officinalis is yellow-flowered and it's high in coumarin. Mellilotus albus is white and also high in coumarin. Mellilotus donata is low in coumarin. Dicoumarin, remember it comes from moldy hay, moldy sweet clover hay, interferes with the metabolism and synthesis of vitamin K, and the liver needs vitamin K to synthesize the clotting factors. It is not usually a problem in silage or pasture, and it's toxic to all types of livestock, but is seen more often with cattle than with horses. Moving on to a couple of other forages, and this will be review for you, but it doesn't hurt to do that. Sericea and bird's-foot trefoil, Sericea lespedeza cuneata, bird's-foot trefoil, Lotus corniculatus, are both non-bloating legumes. Sericea, you will remember, has another superpower, and that is it is very helpful for sheep and goats to help them fight off parasites. It is a natural dewormer. So that is a very special characteristic of Sericea, and I would call that a superpower. Moving on to a couple of forages whose superpower relates to the fact that they are one of the most flooding tolerant forages that we know of. The first of these is Alsike clover, seen here. The next one that we'll talk about is reed canary grass. Now, before we do that, I want to couch that, the next couple of species in context. We often and nearly always start to get questions about flood tolerance or tolerance or an adaptation to flooded ground in the springtime when we've come through a major flood event. And it happens so frequently in Kentucky that these questions come quite frequently. And the questions go something like this: what would you plant on land that is prone to flooding? And of course, Alsike and reed canary grass come to mind, but these, as you will see, have some limitations. The two that you need to also remember are flood tolerant are tall fescue and white clover, and these are certainly forages that deserve a look when you're trying to seed down an area that is prone to flooding. So let's go back and start talking about Alsike clover, or Trifolium hybridum. From the scientific name, you would think that it's a hybrid between clovers, and they thought at one point that it might be a hybrid between red and white clover. Quite obviously, or they found it subsequent that it is not, but they did not change the name. As I said, the claim to fame for Alsike clover, it is very flood tolerant. It has an erect growth habit like red clover, but can be toxic, and you'll find two things about Alsike almost every time you find it referenced: the tolerance to flooding, and then the fact that it leads to photosensitization in light-colored areas, or the white-skinned areas of horses. And if it's bad enough, it can cause liver damage. As I said, red clover and Alsike clover are similar. And here is a list of differences between those two. And we'll just go through these pretty quickly. In this table, they list red clover as a biennial. For us, it lasts 2 to 2.5 to 3 years. So we call it a short-lived perennial. Alsike in this table is a perennial, which would lead you to believe that Alsike would live longer than red clover in those areas where it is adapted. Flower color is somewhat similar, with the Alsike clover having a lighter pink or a whitish pink flower. The flowers occur at different places. On a red clover plant, they occur at the terminal, at the very edge or top of the plant. With Alsike clover, they are formed in the axils of leaves, so they would form all throughout the stem. The plant height is listed, giving Alsike an advantage and growing up to 30 inches, which is quite tall for a legume. In Kentucky, red clover can easily grow to 2 feet tall, although in this table it limits it to about 15 inches. The leaf surface and the stems and the leaf surface and leaf edge are the areas where you will most easily tell these two species apart. The leaf surface on red clover has the white V watermark, and there is no white V or watermark on the leaves of Alsike clover. The edge of red clover leaves tend to not have serrations. The Alsike clover leaves tend to have serrations. And a very big one is the fact that there are prominent and numerous hairs on the leaves and stems of red clover, but not on Alsike clover. This is some photographs of both. The red clover is on the left, the Alsike is on the right. You can pretty easily see the watermark in red clover, but lacking thereof in Alsike. A difference in the flower color, although it's pretty subtle in this picture. You can see, though, quite clearly that there are a lot of stems, or a lot of hairs on the stems of red clover, but no hairs on the stems of Alsike clover. And moving on to another forage that has its superpower being very flood tolerant is reed canary grass, or Phalaris arundinaceae. And as I said, it's very tolerant of flooding. It is high yielding. It can be aggressive. It can form a sod from short rhizomes. If it's an unimproved variety, like you might find in lowland areas or ditches, then it's going to be unpalatable, or at least less palatable than some of the improved varieties, especially when mature. And to me, the seed heads of reed canary grass look a lot like Timothy. There are low alkaloid varieties, Palatine, Rival, Venture, and Bellevue. And I know Palatine is at least 20 to 25 years old. Moving on to another forage that I think has some very positive special powers or superpowers, and that is annual ryegrass, or Lolium multiflorum. Its superpower, it has two of them. As far as seedling vigor, nothing is better than annual ryegrass. And in fact, we would say it's one of the few forages that can germinate when broadcast on top of the ground if you get enough rain and the seed stays in place. It also has exceptional forage quality, and I would say the highest forage quality of any forage we can raise in Kentucky. It is good for winter and early spring grazing and for making silage or baleage, but it's considered to be hard to cure for hay. The pictures on the right are of annual ryegrass. At least the top one is in a orchard grass seeding from taken, of course, in late May, early June. The pictures at the bottom are seed heads comparing the seed head of annual ryegrass with perennial. And I would call your attention to the fact that the difference between annual and perennial ryegrass seed heads is the presence of awns, these little fine hairs at the end of the seed of annual ryegrass, but not of perennial. A lot of times, if you didn't seed it, where you see annual ryegrass would be as a contaminant in the year following seeding of one of our cool season grasses. Annual ryegrass is considered other crop on the seed tag, and it takes precious little annual ryegrass to look like a heck of a lot in a field. And in fact, the field that this picture was taken in, if you looked at it from the side, it looked like it had to be 100% annual ryegrass, and it was less than 1% in the bag. So annual ryegrass has a lot of seedling vigor, and it tends to be a prolific reseeder as well as that. So in cases where you have a problem controlling this plant, like in wheat production, ryegrasses, annual ryegrass in particular, is quite a problematic weed. I'd like to show you a video, time-lapse video, that compares the seedling vigor of several of our major forage crops. So here we go. And I'd like to credit to Gabriel Roberts, who is a technician for Ray Smith, who put this together.